presented their portion of the closing argument. I allotted them 2 hours. So they have 30 minutes left. In addition, I gave 25 minutes for rebuttal. So they have a total of 55 minutes, okay? What we're going to do is, I was able to talk to the transportation people. Say it, so let's do it now. We're going to 4:30 today, or as close to 4:30 as we can, because what I don't want to do is be unfair to one side or the other by not finishing this today. But the 4:30 will enable me not only to let each party finish, but to have some breaks. I don't think that they'll utilize all the time, but if they do, oh well, we have it done. Tomorrow, we'll be here at 9:30. Now let me explain what's going on. I will instruct you. My instructions are about an hour and a half. What does that mean to you? 4 of you will be eliminated. You will not be able to discuss your testimony with anyone because we may have to call you back for some reason. Friday. Let's do it again. You deliberate on Friday, okay? You're going to be here at 9, and you can go as much as up to 4 o'clock. Then if necessary, you will go every day after that, Monday through Friday. If you choose to go Saturday and Sunday, you'll be doing it by yourself, okay? And that's not allowed, okay? So that's how we're going to go, all right? To the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may begin, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. On the 27th day of January in 2012, the Grosse Pointe Park Police Department announced that Robert Bashara, my client and Mrs. Diallo's client, was a person of interest in the death of Jane Bashara. Detective or Investigator Olson from the Detroit Police Department said that term means the same thing to him as suspect. So since that day, nearly 3 years ago now, there's been a cloud over the head of Robert Bashara, having to do with him being the suspect in the murder of his wife. And there's been a target on his back along with that cloud. And he has been waiting all that time for this day, this trial that actually began more than 9 weeks ago, as his time of vindication, of the opportunity that he would have to have citizens such as yourselves come into this courtroom, listen to the evidence, scrutinize that evidence, and make a determination about what the truth is. Because that's what a trial is. A trial is a search for the truth, and the people that find that truth are you all, the jury, the citizens, the people that don't have any bias, that don't know anybody, that don't have any skin in the game, the people that come in probably reluctantly
initially
to sit and to listen, to observe, to take the measure of the witnesses, to see how one thing matches up with another, to use their common sense, their everyday experiences, and to come to a determination of what that truth actually is. And during the course of these past 9 weeks, up until now and until the end of today, you all are silent. You're not allowed to say a word. You can't speak in the courtroom. You can't talk to one another about the only reason why you're here, the facts and the evidence, the things that happened during the course of the trial. But once Judge Evans finishes her instructions tomorrow, then that's all going to change. And the only voices that are going to be important in this trial from this point on, or that point on, are going to be yours. You, 12 of you, whichever 12 are decided upon at the end by lot to be the ones who are the deciders of the facts. It will be your voice that announces whether the people have satisfied their very high burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or not, as to each and every one of the 5 charges facing Mr. Bashara today. The lawyers will be silent. Judge will be silent. All the witnesses are gone. And it will be your voice. You all will have the last word, unified, saying whether Mr. Bashara has been found guilty of any of these charges. He didn't know who'd come. He didn't know who'd be sitting in those chairs. But he knew, as sure as I stand here this afternoon, that if this evidence was exposed to the light of day, the case against Bob Bashara was shown to disinterested citizens, that he would be vindicated. He's waited for this a long time, and soon it'll be in your hands. Now, in trying to figure out a good way to have you think about this evidence, and you've certainly seen a tremendous amount of evidence, and to interpret that and to measure it against that yardstick, the legal yardstick of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I've given a lot of thought to what I could tell you to try and assist you with that. And what I remembered from a long time ago when I was a student in college, I had an English professor when I was a freshman who talked about, in English literature, the characters we read about, the stories that we had to read, the books, the novels that we had to read. Every story, every book, every situation that these characters faced, they were always faced with this dilemma that he taught us about, which was knowing the difference between what really is and what merely seems to be. And I didn't understand that when I was 18. But as 40 plus years have gone by, I have come to understand that what he was talking about is something I apply in my everyday life as a lawyer, because that's exactly what we are faced with in criminal trials that I deal with on a regular basis. You've got a lot of evidence, and some of that evidence looks like something, and some of that evidence actually is the truth. Your job is to figure out that difference between what merely is and what really is the truth. What really is and what merely seems to be. That's what I'm going to ask you to focus your attention on as you deliberate. Make the distinction between those two things, because throughout these 8 weeks that we presented witnesses and you saw exhibits and all of this evidence was presented, a lot of it, I submit to you, doesn't have anything to do with anything at all in terms of proving that Bob Bashara conspired to kill his wife, that Bob Bashara solicited Joe Gens to kill his wife, that Bob Bashara aided and abetted in the first-degree murder of his wife. Because those 3 counts, counts 1, 2, and 3, are what this trial is all about. This is a murder trial. This isn't an obstruction of justice trial. This isn't a witness intimidation trial. Those are little sideshows, and they're serious charges, and they need to be addressed. I grant you that. But the fact of the matter is, we're here because Jane Bashara died. She died a brutal and horrible death with no justification whatsoever. And I, on behalf of Mr. Bashara and Mrs. Diallo, would never try to say anything different than that. You heard from Dr. Diaz, the medical examiner, who explained in very clear detail, meticulous detail, step by step, the things that happened to Mrs. Bashara that caused her death. Now, in the presentation of the evidence, the people's case in chief throughout the course of this trial, we've seen a number of theories that the defense submits to you are just plain wrong. And the first theory is that Bob hired Tabato to kill Gens because Gens was the only person able to implicate him in Jane's murder. Well, that's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is this. I mean, that's a theory that happened, but the proof is there's 2 reasons, 2 good reasons for Bob Bashara to want to see Joe Gens out of the way. And I'm not justifying or trying to minimize the fact that there was a crime committed by Mr. Bashara when he solicited Tabata, and they enter into this deal where Tabato's going to set up the hit on Joe Gens. Don't misinterpret what we say here as being justification for that, because it isn't. But the fact is, what's important in this trial, and the only reason that evidence has any significance in this trial, is to talk about his motivation for committing that crime. And I submit to you that, first and foremost, he knows, like we all know, that Joe Gens killed Jane Bashara. He wanted revenge. Secondly, Joe Gens very easily could frame Bob Bashara in order to make a good deal for himself. And that's borne out by his own statements. And it's borne out by the facts of this case. Because remember, Joe Gens, he ends up making a deal. He committed a first-degree murder without question. But he ends up pleading guilty to second-degree murder, and he's only serving a sentence of from 17 and a half years to 28 years. Second theory. Bob wanted Jane dead so that he could marry Rachel Gillette and live in that lifestyle happily ever after. This is part of that business of what merely seems to be the lifestyle. This whole BDSM. One of these days I'll get that straight and it'll roll off my tongue more easily. But the fact of the matter is, that is a smokescreen. It's salacious. One of the reasons why this case has had so much publicity, why we have such a following here in this courtroom this afternoon, is because of the sex appeal, the literal sex appeal of this case. All the salacious nature of this oddball lifestyle of bondage, discipline, sadomasochism. The average person doesn't have very much understanding or interest or knowledge about it, but it certainly has been the thing that gave this story life for the last almost 3 years. But the truth of the matter is, Bob had no desire for Jane to die, nor did he have a need for that to even occur. He's not motivated by that. He and Rachel Gillette would continue to live this double life that he had. Miss Lindsay put it so well. He's leading a double life, and there's no question about that. We all know that. But the thing is, he didn't start leading that life in 2011. He'd been doing that, according to Rick Falcinelli, since 2004. He said that he knew Bob for about 10 years. Well, that's 2004. And where did he meet him? He didn't meet him in church. He didn't meet him at a business function. He met him at what they call a social function. It's kind of like a code for dealing with this BDSM, because it was surprising to me how many of these witnesses came in and used the same type of language. But the fact is, he'd known him all that time. So Bob's involved in this, going back from 2004 to the beginning of 2012. And he's known as Rachel Gillette since 2008. And no matter what he did that was wrong, she was outraged about, she broke up with him, she always went back to him. And she would have gone back if they didn't close on that house on Kensington, which they weren't going to do, because that was an impossibility. The third reason, the third theory, is that Bob needed to have Jane dead so that he could close the sale of the house on Kensington. But that wasn't going to be happening. He had no intention of closing that sale or of living with Rachel Gillette. He's going to move into a house right next door to this guy stiff as a board, Michael Carmody, who doesn't know anybody that has an affair, doesn't know a married man that's got a girlfriend. This guy that lives in an ivory tower, Bob's going to move a married man that's got a girlfriend. This guy that lives in an ivory tower, Bob's going to move Rachel Gillette and this other person, Miss Oregon, into that house there on Kensington. That's preposterous. The only bright thing that I heard that Mr. Wolf say was what Miss Lindsay quoted earlier today. Bob, you're crazy. Bob's a nuts idea. But he's telling all that to Rachel because he's humoring her and he's just, filling her head with nonsense. But, sooner or later they were just going to run out of gas with that idea. And that was going to happen because there wasn't going to be any closing. You see, as you all know, because you do have common sense and life experience, one thing, the key thing, to buying a house is to show up with the money. Well, we had that guy, the banker, Calcaterra, in here. He wrote this, very non-committal commitment letter, so to speak, from his mortgage company, and this is going back to sometime in October when he testified. But the bottom line is there weren't any figures there that would show that Bob had the wherewithal in order to be able to close on a house, and he said, hey, look, the only assets they had were Jane's assets. So there was no mortgage. He had no money in place. He hadn't borrowed the money from his mother. She said that she didn't know anything about that, and it was going to be $235,000. So how's he going to do that? The truth of the matter is he isn't going to do that. And what's he going to do later? He's going to have to sweet talk Rachel again, and she'll be mad, and she'll break up. But, when she testified, I quit writing down about the breakups and the reconciliation after I got to the third one, because I thought, this is just ridiculous. And how am I going to get it straight? And I know that you all heard about those things. Maybe your memories are better than me, but like I said, after 3 there were a number more, but I just figured it was irrelevant from that point. And this idea, Bob did a bad thing. He wasted Kathy Young's time. He wasted Lorraine Roselli's time. These people, these realtors, they got a good reason to not like him because they put this effort into trying to sell a house, and it's just a lot of foolishness, and they end up with no closing. No closing, no payday. So they have a legitimate beef. But it's not a reason to be killing Jane Bashara. And nothing would happen differently. Had he decided that this is the way we're going to pay for the house. I'm going to kill Jane on Tuesday, and then I'll show up with a big sack of money on Friday. That's an impossibility. That just didn't happen. Didn't make any more money available. And, this whole focus on the 401k plan, Robert Jr. testified back in October about the fact that money is still tied up to this day, or at least to that day, October the 23rd or thereabouts, during the course of this trial. So obviously that wouldn't have closed. So this just wasn't going to happen. And this talk that Kathy Young heard and James Krausman heard about what they were going to do with the house, that's just Bob giving Rachel a lot of baloney. And that's all it is. The next theory that I submit the people have postulated, and it's still incorrect, is that Bob needed to have Jane dead so that he'd get to her 401k account valued at $800,000. This loses track and sight of the fact that Jane Bashara was a breadwinner in that family. Now, she may have protected that $800,000 account or whatever its value was at various points in time, but the fact of the matter is, she's the one who's the strong earner. We saw those, income statements side by side. In 2011, Bob earned $18,000 and some odd dollars, less than 20 grand. He's making less than, I would say, 20. Maybe he's making 22% of what it is that Jane's made. The thing is, that $94,000 that shows up on her W-2, which is an exhibit that's been admitted into evidence for 2011, doesn't include the amount of money that she was getting from her pension from DTE. Now, she's the one who's paying for the nice lifestyle over there in Grosse Pointe Park. It's on her income, because $20,000, you can't live there on $20,000. She's the one, don't forget, she's up out the door at 5:45 in the morning. She's the one that's not getting home until 6 or 6:30 at night. She's working hard all the time. Those are her values. She's a hard worker. What did Bob tell the detectives on the day that he goes in for the interview on the 26th of January? He was still in bed when Jane went to work. He didn't even get up until about 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, if you don't get up and out of bed in the morning and hit it hard all day long, you're not going to earn much of a living, especially here in southeastern Michigan, and certainly not after the recession we had. So he's got it good. And she's the person who's given it to him. That good life, providing for him to live in that nice house, to have the leisure time, to be able to go out and do all those good deeds in a Rotary, to raise money for St. Michael's Episcopal Church, to help support Grosse Pointe South High School, to go on a 2-week trip with his daughter's volleyball team when they're at a camp somewhere. At one point during her high school career, when Eileen Stradalek and he did that together. You can't do all those things where you're just basically goofing off unless you've got some stream of income. So why would he ever kill Jane? I put down there she's the golden goose. That might sound a little bit crass, but the fact of the matter is the hard figures make it clear that she was the breadwinner. Why would he want her dead? And then the fifth prosecution theory about divorce. We heard about that. Well, if Bob's going to get a divorce, the person who loses in a divorce is Jane, not Bob. Now we have this Patrick Webb. Remember him? The guy who fashioned himself as some kind of an expert on his BDSM stuff. Well, he says, he doesn't have this recorded, he claims, his word, that Bob said, well, it'd be cheaper if I just killed the bitch. Okay? Well, that sounds damaging. When you consider a piece of evidence like that, you got to do two things. You got to, number one, size up the individual who said it. And you got to make a decision about whether you believe him. The second thing you have to do is you got to consider it in the context. If it actually was said by Bob Bashara, you got to think about the context in which it was said. He's leading a double life. He's there with Rachel. They're at this BDSM hotel or whatever kind of place that this guy Webb was running, in the fraternity house or the reformatory, depending on when in time his statement was made. All those people around know that Bob and Rachel are together. They also know that Bob is divorced. He's got to say these things in Rachel's presence, and I'm going to get a divorce because that keeps her happy. And so then he's just joking around with these other people, and he's saying, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to get a divorce. Maybe I ought to do it like this. He's not serious. This isn't a piece of evidence upon which you got to find beyond a reasonable doubt that this man over here, Bashara, wanted to kill his wife and then is out announcing it to the world, to clowns like Patrick Webb. That's where your common sense comes in. That's where reason comes in. You think about these things and you go, oh, wait a minute. The guy's leading a double life, and it's all BS when he's with Rachel and the BDSM people. It's baloney. Then he's over in the straight life, Grosse Pointe Park, the Rotary, the St. Michael's Church. Well, he's not saying anything like that then. And he and Jane, from all experiences, are a happy couple. And they have a nice life. And he's doing good things. He's the president of the Rotary, and he's raising money for the community. He's active in the church. He's raising money for the church. So he's got these two things going on at the same time. You got to ask yourself, and you got to decide. Well, is Rachel Gillette going to force him to do all these things? Because don't forget, the person who loses in a divorce, according to Jane's sister, Jane's own state of mind, her belief when she discussed this with her sister, Miss Rowe, was that she'd get half. She'd have half of her pension. She'd have half of her 401k. She wouldn't be living in that house on Middlesex. She'd be 50 or in her mid-50s, and she'd be living in a condo. She didn't want any part of that. She recognized the reality that she would lose in a divorce, not Bob. We know this man here, he killed him. He's responsible without question. You got to ask yourself this question now. Why is it that this man, this brute, this individual who killed Jane Bashara with his boot by crushing her neck, breaking her windpipe, not one time but 2 times, fractures going in crisscross directions, causing her to die an excruciating death. And not only did she suffer those injuries, but you saw that hematoma that she suffered to her head, that blunt force trauma, either by being kicked by those boots or by having him raise that boot up again and crush it down on her throat repeatedly, causing the right side of her head to be bashed against the ground. This man is second-degree murder. This man over here, on the proof you've seen so far, he's the target. They want him. They want him bad. They want him for first-degree murder, solicitation to murder, conspiracy to murder. Why? He lied when he voluntarily goes to the police department on the 26th of January, and you saw the tape. He doesn't tell them everything about his BDSM lifestyle. He doesn't tell Special Agent O'Riordan about the affair he's having with Rachel Gillette. Now, is that consciousness of guilt? Or is that, I look pretty bad as it is here. Or is that because he's embarrassed by that? He's leading this double life. It's being exposed to the light of day, or it will be. He's fearful of that. He knows he didn't commit this crime, but he's got some skeletons in his closet without question. And he didn't come forth with that information. He didn't just throw himself on the sword in front of those police officers and say, oh yeah, by the way, I've been having this affair. He's trying to sort out, now I got this huge problem that I didn't create. I look bad, and I'm going to look worse. Because remember what he told the detectives when he first went down to the police station the day after his wife's body was found. He says, I understand that in 70% of the cases, the people look at the husband, or the police look at the husband. So he's got that in his mind going in. I doubt like heck that he thought that by putting out there the fact that he was having an affair, that would help him at all, okay? And is he thinking clearly? We're holding Bob to a real high standard here about how it is that he's supposed to conduct himself when he interacts with the police. The problem with all that is his wife was murdered. Unexpectedly. Brutally. He's got to deal with the grief of all that. And, there's no rule book about reaction and how it is that you deal with somebody dying. There's a wide gamut of a wide array of manners in which different people respond to horrible news. Now, there's a rush to judgment in this case. I submit to you that Detective Olson or Investigator Olson from Detroit, he says, I'm going to take the lead on this. Because Captain Locke over here, he's not experienced in homicides. He never had anybody get killed in Grosse Pointe Park before. So I'm the Detroit guy. I'm the guy from homicide. I know what I'm doing. I'll do the thinking. And so what are they doing? First thing they do is they have a little confab out in front of Bob's house. Now, he is keenly interested in knowing what's going on. And you know that because Captain Locke told you that he called the night of the 24th, and you know about that. You even heard the dispatcher talk about that. And then he called throughout the night or the early morning of the 25th of January. He wants to know what's going on. And I recounted all those different times that he called the police station. They're not calling him. They don't have to look for him. He's right there. Which gives a lie to this business, this idea that when Officer Matthews comes back to the Bashara home to have Mr. Bashara sign a consent form so they can put Mrs. Bashara's vehicle identification into the lien, that he is coming from upstairs to downstairs and he's rubbing sleep out of his eyes. Well, that's awful funny at 5 o'clock in the morning. Because if you look at the record, you see that Bob calls at 4:49. He calls again at 4:57. To where? The police station. So how much sleep was he getting when he was calling in the moments before 2 o'clock in the morning? He called again at 3:28. Where is he sound asleep that night? That's just not right. But why does Officer Matthews say that? Because there's a rush to judgment. And we want to make Bashara look bad. And impress upon you that this guy who purportedly had his wife killed, purportedly was present when it happened, he doesn't care. Well, that's not true. Because the fact of the matter is, we got more phone records in this case than I've ever seen accumulated for any other reason in my lifetime. But we got phone records, and Bob is a guy who gets on the phone a lot. There's no question about that. But we got phone records that show that throughout that night, he's trying to find out what's going on. And he's asking what is happening, and he's making those calls to make inquiry because he cares. So by the time 10 10:30 in the morning or thereabouts rolls around, and Detective Olson, Sergeant Hannes, and Captain Locke appear, and they're talking out on the sidewalk before they come up to the front door. You got to ask yourself, well, what is the discussion? Now, if all they have to do is go in there and tell Mr. Bashara that, hey, I am really sorry, I've got horrible news to tell you. You know, I could do that. I could come around the corner on 2 wheels and pull up his driveway and race up to his front door and do that without giving it any thought at all. So what's the confab for? Well, I'll tell you what the confab's for. It's because on the morning of the 25th of January, at that scene on Anna, where her body was discovered, Mrs. Bashara's, they made up their mind then. There's something funny about all this. We're going to deal with the husband. I'll bet you he's in. That target was on his back before he knew it, because it didn't get announced until 2 days later. It's always been a rush to judgment. And that's the thing that has been consistent throughout this. Bob's the guy. It doesn't matter who else might pop up, who else involved in this case may have committed a crime. We're going to give those people a free pass because this is our target. This is a big prize. We want this guy, Bob Bashara. So can I get the next one? Or is it working? Yeah. Thank you.
Coming over here.
Wait a minute, let's stand up and take a stretch.
Okay. Now, I've already talked a little bit about Investigator Olson. But you know, he's the guy who says inside the house when Bob and Captain Locke and Sergeant Hannes are all sitting together with Investigator Olson, Bob's got no reaction to the news that Jane is dead. Well, that makes him sound like he's a pretty cold-hearted guy. But you got to really scrutinize that. Because what does Captain Locke say? Well, he says, you know, I knew him from before. He was pretty quiet. And I asked him, I said, is that customary? He goes, no. Pretty talkative. Bob in shock? You got to ask yourself that question. Then, Mrs. Bashara, Nancy Bashara, the defendant's mother, she says she heard him scream out. She was in a different room, and she ran to him. Now, you can say to yourself, well, gee whiz, that's the guy's mother. She's going to stand up for her boy. Don't forget, Nancy Bashara tells you when Miss Lindsay asked her whether she knew him, she says, yes, since December the 12th, 1957, at some hour of the day when he was born, whenever that was. And she knew it by heart. So, yeah, you could count on somebody's ma standing up and saying something for you that would be beneficial. But then we got a fourth person to comment on this, and that is Debbie Breen. She is a friend of Jane's. She comes over to the house. She sees Bob with his head in his hands, and he's crying. She doesn't like Bob. She's not his advocate. She wasn't a witness who showed up because she wanted to put a good word in for him, but she came telling the truth. And the truth of the matter is that he did have emotion about the loss of his wife. He was torn up about it. Now there's this other business. This stuff about when did the cat get out of the bag about this being a murder? Because, you know, Olson, he's playing it smart. He wants to trap Bob. He says, we didn't tell him anything like that. We didn't make any announcement. We just told him that his wife's body was found in her car over on the east side, or up on the east side. Well, I would submit to you that, you know, Bob, he's not a stupid person. He knows that there's something wrong because his wife didn't come home and she didn't leave a note and he doesn't know why she isn't there. 3 plainclothes policemen come to his house. They're pretty grim. They got this news to tell him. This is completely unlike Jane. She's perfectly healthy. She didn't have a heart attack. She didn't have a stroke and die in her car. And she wouldn't have been up on the east side. So, because he isn't stupid, because he's using his common sense, he knows damn well what's going on here. So if he says that to his daughter, And Ms. Flaska says, well, no one ever mentioned the word murder before, but he tells that to Jessica. Is that something that's odd? You think that because the implication is he's using insider knowledge that he has and the police didn't give it to him. Well, he just put 2 and 2 together and got 4. It's not because he's guilty. It's because he's engaged, he cares, and he's come to the conclusion that we all know to be the truth. Now, we got Captain Locke. He's there too. Captain Locke's got some other significance. This is really significant because there's no evidence presented throughout the entire course of this trial that the death of Jane Bashara occurred in the garage of that house. You just don't have that. And Captain Locke, he provided the information, a little bit late, but nevertheless, that report that's in evidence from Michigan State University's botany and science departments that the leafy material found on Jane's sock is not at all matched to the leafy material and vegetation material found on the garage floor. Now, if that report had been around in the hands of the prosecutor's office on the 11th of November, you never would have had all that evidence from Melinda Jackson about the little drop of blood found on the garage floor with luminol and that leafy material or vegetation being maybe 6 feet apart from one another or 5 foot 6 apart, whatever it was. None of that has any relevance. That's the reason that all of that evidence was presented to you was to convince you that the crime occurred in the garage. There's no evidence to prove that it's in the garage. And this thing about it being a stage scene, when you look at those photographs from Annott Street there in the alley, and you show the car, or the car door open on the right side, and on the floorboard is the purse. The purse is dumped over. What's sitting up on the top? What's sitting up on the top is a wallet that doesn't have any cash in it. So who says that Joe Getz didn't take something from Mrs. Bashara? And who says where this happened? And you know what? This other business about all those marks along the left-hand side of that vehicle, where's the coat? Where's the evidence from the coat that shows that all that occurred because Jane, all those marks are there because Jane got rubbed up against that car on the left side during some sort of a struggle? We don't know that. There's no evidence to show that. People want you to infer that. They want you to make those quantum leaps because that's the difference between what really is and what merely seems to be. And that is why you're here, to make that distinction between those two things. Don't be fooled, and don't let the BDSM lifestyle fill in any blanks for you. Scrutinize the evidence. Hold the people to their burden. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And there is reasonable doubt in this trial. Then we have Michael Narduzzi, Detective Narduzzi. He, on this timeline, we got Bob named as a person of interest on the 27th. That's a Friday of January in the evening. The following day, he receives a phone call at 9:46 in the morning, and he contacts his lawyer, which he didn't have a lawyer until the night of the 27th. But Mr. Brewstar came here, he testified about writing that letter, and in doing so, Bob related to him about this phone call that he'd received on the 28th of January, in which Gentz is ranting and saying that you owe me some money, I did you a favor, I want $1,500. Mr. Brewstar takes that over to the Grosse Pointe Police Department the next morning, the 29th, and he delivers it. It's written out to Captain Hiller of the police department, and he says what Mr. Bashara told him. Now, some things were mentioned about that letter not having anything in it about all the other calls that had gone on between Gentz and Bashara earlier in the week. Well, why would any of that be in there if when the threat came, it was on the 28th? And that is the question that, you have to ask. The fact of the matter is, Bob Bashara identifies Gentz after he gets this call, tells it to his lawyer, they don't waste time, they go right to the police station, or Mr. Brewstar does, the following morning or day. He delivers it on the 29th, and Detective Narduzzi goes over to Joe Gentz's house, and he knows how to find it because it's right in the letter that Bob Bashara wrote, or his lawyer did, over there on Weyburn. And they talked to Joe Gentz. Officer Taylor, guy we didn't see, but he went with Detective Narduzzi. They take him back to the police station. Now, they don't record anything that is said, so we don't have a record of that. And then they let him go. But Gentz, he figures that he's cooked because inside of 12 hours, he's back at the police station with Vergona and his pastor, Fritsch, and he's turning himself in. But not before he threw out his boots. Joe Gentz isn't that dumb. He can think for himself. And he thought that for himself. And then, on the 5th of March, Detective Narduzzi, he's got notice of a person by the name of JJ, who's a friend of Joe Gentz, and he goes to see him. And Captain Locke is there too. But they say that this guy, JJ, John McKee, he wasn't cooperative. And because he wasn't cooperative, they didn't talk to him anymore. But they find out, they know, the reason they go see him to begin with is because on the night of the 24th of January, the night that Jane was abducted and killed, those two were seen in a place called My Dad's Bar together. They let him go. We don't have JJ. It's not here. And then we have Sergeant Marco Reardon, Special Agent Marco Reardon from the United States Secret Service. 27th of January, he talks to Bob Bashara. He says, well, his affect was a little odd. He'd just gone and identified the body of his wife, and he just didn't seem like the same kind of guy, or it didn't seem like he was affected the way that I thought it should be. Once again, where's the rule book that says exactly how you're supposed to react when something bad happens? And by this time, it isn't like, Bob just happened to be walking around a street corner and saw his wife dead when he turned the corner. This is something that he's known about for 3 days or 2 days, and he has to go over and identify her by her face because they have it all shrouded around him. And you saw all that evidence of how bodies are shown for purposes of having relatives identify them. Not too much other than just the face. So, and then Bob is there, once again, voluntarily, trying to help the police. And at the same time, unbeknownst to him, he's the target. They're trying to take everything that he says and use it against him. And he's asked about whether he's having an affair, and he says no. But he kind of backs off of that just a little bit. He said, well, I did have an affair about 8 years ago. Is that truthful? No, it's not. Well, what's he lying about? Is he lying about, I didn't kill my wife? No. I mean, that's the reason why we're here. Not about whether he's lecherous or he's having an affair or any of those kinds of things. Because he's not charged with adultery, even though that is a crime. It's not something that's before you in this trial. This is a murder trial. We got some evidence here regarding the telephone usage of not telephones, but cell phones. Exhibit number 294. You're going to have all these exhibits in the jury room when you're deliberating. This is Special Agent Christopher Hess of the FBI. He's an expert. He was qualified in cellular tower analysis, and he wrote a report. It is that exhibit 294, and on page 6 of that report he goes, however, the cell sites utilized provided service in and around both locations of interest. Those locations of interest are 552 Middlesex and the location of the Mac property that the defendant owned, Hard Luck Cafe or Lounge, and Dylan's Raw Bar. The second sentence that he says on page 6, the intent is to transmit the same frequency. Therefore, no determination can be made to differentiate which cellular footprint the target telephone utilized. So I submit to you that call made by Bashara at 6:26 p.m. came from behind the Hard Luck Lounge and not from over there on Middlesex by the house. And then Special Agent Hess shows all these these different towers in this map that is, the area that shows 552 Middlesex, and this is in this exhibit right behind that page number 6, and shows these different cell towers, and then he shows a picture on the next page of the Hard Luck, or not, actually that's Dylan's, but this is behind the Hard Luck Lounge property, and he says Tower 94, 144, 156, and 994 signals noted behind Hard Luck Lounge. So we know that Bob was back there behind that place because he said so, and other people saw him there. And those are those towers that he's talking about, 994, 156, 94. So, and 156. So the fact is, that fits right in with what it is that Bob has been saying all along. I was at my Mac property. And who saw him there? Christy Sample, the bartender. She said he showed up about 5:15. And he didn't leave until 8:15 after he and Mike Carmody had a couple beers together. He was in and out. And he was around the premises. Missy Keller, she saw him out there cleaning up when she looked out. Carol Porzondek, she saw Bob on the sidewalk in front of the place at about 7 o'clock, which is exactly corroborated by what Mike Carmody said when he showed up there to have 2 beers with him. Think about this Carmody, he says, I feel like I've been used by Bob Bashara, used me as an alibi, he set me up because I'm a solid citizen and all that. This was a good way to have people see me with him at that time, and that makes me being used. Well, I got a question for Mike Carmody. A question for you to think about. What would Bob do if Mike Carmody had said, you know what, it's a cold night in January, it's dark, I'm home, I don't feel like putting on different clothes and coming out, I'm just going to stay home, thanks anyway. He had no way of knowing at about 6:40 or thereabouts whether Mike Carmody would come out to play that evening. He had no way of knowing the answer to that at all. Why does he want to see him? Not to be an alibi, but because he wants to have a couple of beers with his friend. That's what he said. And this Carol Porzondek, how does he know that she's going to be anywhere near there? But she confirms it. And Missy Keller, same thing. And then, they make a lot about Missy Keller. Bob goes to see Missy after he's named as a person of interest. A couple months go by, or at least in March, he's talking to her and he says, you saw me there. And he sees her friend and he says, and you saw me there too that night. Well, is there anything that's not logical about that? Here's a guy that knows that he's in the crosshairs of the prosecution. He hasn't been arrested yet. He hasn't been charged yet. But he certainly knows that he's the person of interest. He's the suspect. And he wants to make certain that nothing, that anything that he can do to bring witnesses that would help him out is done. This tax, there's an exhibit. It's 518. It's entered by stipulation last week. It shows that on Bob's computer at his house, he logged into the QuickBooks program on the computer. Now, why did he do that? Because what he told the police, what he said from the beginning is Jane and I were supposed to get together about 8 o'clock. We were going to work on taxes together. This isn't doing a, 1040 and like you would go to H&R Block and have them do for you if all you have is your wage certificate, the W-2. There's a little bit more complication to that. And Rick Falsinelli confirmed that fact, being a property owner, renting out houses or apartments himself. And so you got to get your records in order before you can ever show it to your accountant or your tax preparer, and that's what they were going to do. And his computer corroborates that. So look at that, because you'll see that his statement regarding those plans is a truthful statement, not just something made up. Then we've got this scientific evidence. Melinda Jackson testified about one blood spot being on the garage floor, and she collected blood off the garage door, and she said that she wasn't surprised if somebody who lived in the house might have a little bit of their own blood laying around there. And then we got Andrea Young. She's the DNA person. And what did she say? She conducted DNA analysis. The blood on the floor, that little spot that they got, that through the luminol applied by the state police, that showed that it was Jane's blood. And then there's YSTR DNA material in the floor that matches to Bob. Now the YSTR is different than DNA that has anything to do with your chromosomes other than your Y chromosome, and it shows that blood, that YSTR DNA runs down the male line, and that Bob has exactly the same. It'd be a match to his brother, or not, well, probably to his brother, but to his, if he had one, but to his father and to his son. So these are people that live in the house. His dad's been dead a long time, but his son certainly is well acquainted with that house and has been there. And so that could have not even been Bob's. It could have been Robert Jr.'s. And even if it is Bob's, who cares? It's not significant. It's not like he's got his DNA dropped in some crime scene that isn't his house. And he has no business being at. This is where he lives and where Jane lives. And both Miss Jackson and Ms. Young testified that they can't tell you how old those blood samples are. She can't tell you how old that blood on the garage door is, but the garage door matched to Jane. You know that the DNA on Gentz's right boot bottom, Jane cannot be excluded. It's not a perfect match, but there are some of those alleles that are the same. And so why would anything that even that Jane can't be excluded be on the bottom of Joe Gentz's boot heel? Well, we know why. Because he did this. He committed the crime. And that's how he did it. And that's how he left those impressions on her face, those pattern impressions that showed up on her face and on her neck. And then he's got his DNA on the gear shift, or he can't be excluded. But then there is a match to the gear shift with his YSTR. It isn't Joe Gentz's dad driving that Mercedes-Benz, and it certainly isn't his son, because he doesn't have one. So that's definitely his. And that's different than the situation with Bob. And then we've got the YSTR DNA in Jane's left hand nails matched against. Where do you get that big cut on his left cheek? Because she's fighting for her life while he killed her. Gents can't be excluded from the blood found in Jane's left hand nail. Clearly it shows Mr. Second Degree Murder Man killed Jane Bashara.
Let's stop here. 10-minute recess.
All right.
All rise for the jury.
You may be seated. Yeah. Yeah.